Welcome to the InnerSelf.com audio version of The Coronavirus Contains Its Own Vaccine and the Medicine for Separation. Written by Paul Levy and excerpted from his book Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World. The article is narrated by Marie T. Russell, publisher of InnerSelf.com. Living through a global pandemic can feel surreal, as if we're living in a dream world. Though it can feel like we're living through a collective nightmare, there are precious gifts encoded within the experience that should not be overlooked. Of course, it's imperative to deal with the physical outbreak of the virus by every means at our disposal. And yet, it would be a tragedy beyond measure if we focused our attention merely on its external manifestation, while marginalizing what the pandemic is touching and revealing within us about ourselves. An invisible specter in the field, the coronavirus is creating havoc in our world, disrupting business as usual as it ripples, both in our world and within our psyches, throughout the globe. To quote Jung, "Everything could be left undisturbed did not the new way demand to be discovered, and did it not visit humanity with all the plagues of Egypt until it finally is discovered." End of quote. The coronavirus can be envisioned as a modern-day plague of Egypt. It is a living revelation that is dying to show us something about who we are and our place in the universe. What it is revealing to us about ourselves is crucially important for us to know. Our very survival depends upon receiving its message. We are all in this together. We hear every day the phrase, "We're all in this together." In the late 1950s, Jung wrote words that are as relevant today as they were then. And I quote, "We are in the soup that is going to be cooked for us, whether we claim to have invented it or not. We are threatened with universal genocide if we cannot work out the way of salvation by a symbolic death." End of quote. In other words, we are fated to suffer an unconscious literal death if we don't consciously go through a symbolic death. This symbolic death has everything to do with finding the new way that is demanding to be discovered by our current worldwide plague. As we go through a species-wide dark night of the soul, the mythic night sea journey, our illusions about the world we live in, and ourselves as well, are being shattered. Seeing through the illusions is a symbolic death of the self that was wed to and lived by illusion. Being disillusioned, having our illusions dispelled, is to become sober, stepping out of our intoxicated state. Being disillusioned is truly mortifying, a real death. It is the dying of an overly one-sided and bogus image of who we are. Remember, one of Wetiko's other names is me disease, a misidentification of who we think we are. An archetypal death-rebirth experience. Our species has gotten grafted into an archetypal death-rebirth experience. In symbolically dying to a part of ourselves that is no longer serving us, another part of us is being reborn. We as a species have been drawn into the cycle of the death and rebirth of the gods. Said another way, having become part of a deeper, mythic, archetypal, and alchemical process of transformation, we are going through a cosmic death-rebirth experience of a higher order. The divine process of transformation is typically experienced as punishment, torment, an experience of death, and then transfiguration. This divinely sponsored process is subjectively experienced by the human ego as torture. However, if we don't personalize the experience, identify with it, or get stuck in its nightmarish aspect, a great danger, but allow this deeper process to refine us as it moves through us, it can lead us to a transfiguration of our very being. If we remain unconscious when a living archetypal process is activated within us, this inner process will physically manifest itself externally in the outside world. Here, as if by fate, it will get unconsciously dreamt up and acted out in a literal, concrete, and oftentimes destructive way. Instead of going through an inner symbolic death, for example, we then literally kill each other, as well as ultimately ourselves. If we recognize, however, that we are being cast to play a role in a deeper cosmic process, instead of being destined to enact it unconsciously and hence destructively, we are able to consciously and creatively incarnate this archetypal process as individuation. We are all in a state of grieving. Whether consciously or not, since the advent of the coronavirus, we are all in a state of grieving. The world we knew, as well as a false part of ourselves, is dying. Our sense of who we think we are, imagining we exist as a separate self, alien to and apart from other separate selves as well as the rest of the universe, is an illusion whose expiration date has now been reached. If not recognized as illusory, this illusion can become reified and become a lethal mirage. Either our illusion of existing as a separate self expires, or we do. As the poet Rumi would say, we need to die before we die. Seen as a dreaming phenomenon, we have collectively dreamed up a global pandemic, a modern-day plague of Egypt, an invasion by a mysterious microbe from which no one is immune, to help us dispel the primary illusion of the separate self and assist us in facing the reality of who we are in the greater scheme of things. We can, in potential, unite as one to overcome our common enemy, which on one level is the coronavirus, but on a deeper level is our ignorance of our interconnectedness with each other. The coronavirus is our medicine. The coronavirus is the medicine that can help us get over ourselves and realize that the most vital and urgent task for humanity is to see through what Einstein famously calls an optical delusion of consciousness, the illusion of the separate self. To see through the illusion of the separate self is at the same time to take away the power that fear has over us, as well as to empower ourselves. For the experience of separation and the fear of the other mutually co-arise, reciprocally reinforcing each other. The coronavirus feeds off of and engenders fear, within us, all around us, and everywhere in between. Fear is contagious. When it develops enough collective momentum, it feeds on itself, taking on a seemingly autonomous and independent life of its own, driving a downward spiral into the darkness of the underworld. As fear propagates itself through the field, it unleashes the terrifying and fearsome powers of darkness. This then inspires more fear in a never-ending, crazy-making feedback loop. When fear becomes rampant, we become more susceptible to being controlled by external forces. Becoming lucid in the waking dream of life. Our day-to-day lives have changed and become so surreal. Yet if we manage to step out of and not be caught by our fear, it has actually become much easier to recognize the dream-like nature of reality. Hence, it has become easier than it was before the pandemic's arrival to become lucid in the waking dream of life. It's as if we are living a dystopian Philip K. Dick sci-fi novel or movie in which our world has turned upside down and inside out. What could be more dreamlike than that? It is noteworthy that recognizing the dreamlike nature of our shared reality is a realization that dispels fear. Realizing the dreamlike nature is to recognize that we are dream characters, embodied reflective aspects of each other. We all exist relative to, are related to, each other in a seamless, interdependent web of mutual connectivity. This realization carries within it an implicit intuition that otherness and separation are ultimately illusory mental constructs. There is no separate self anywhere to be found when we realize the dreamlike nature of the universe. When we get right down to it, the coronavirus elicits fear as well as, by revealing reality's dreamlike nature, also potentially dispelling the very fear it triggers. It is up to each one of us which of these parallel universes, one riddled with fear, the other dreamlike beyond belief, we invest our attention in and hence create. If we choose the universe ridden by fear, we will undoubtedly be doomed to a tragic fate. If we recognize that the universe is in fact a collective dream, however, and choose to consciously step into the dream, we discover that the universe is malleable. This is to say that we have a hand or two in creating it. As we come to understand this, we begin to realize our intrinsic creative power, another one of the gifts offered to us by the coronavirus outbreak. The lesson of the pandemic is clear. American journalist I.F. Stone was right when he said, "Either we learn to live together or we die together." End of quote. The lesson of the pandemic is clear. Due to our interconnectedness, a health problem in any part of the world can rapidly become a health problem for everyone around the globe. Our world has shrunk. We truly live in a global village. Our tolerating, turning a blind eye toward, or worse yet, engendering disease in any place in the world is at our own peril. This new way of seeing the interrelated unity of humanity can be called holographic awareness. Just like every fragment of a hologram contains the whole hologram, each of us contains encoded within us the whole, which is to say that if any of us are sick, we are all affected. The coronavirus pandemic is a form of collectively shared trauma to which no one is immune. The coronavirus doesn't create an aftershock. It itself is the shock. The virus is multidimensional, having a micro and macro aspect, in that it doesn't just shock our system, it shocks the system. No one among us is untouched by its shattering impact, both upon our lives and within our psyches. When we are shaken up by trauma, however, it can, potentially, be the impetus for a long-dreamed-of transformation within our soul, as our inner constitution can be rewritten in a way that helps us to become free. The coronavirus, by so shaking up our world, our ordinary routines as well as our psyches, is potentially a lucidity stimulator, undreamed of until now, potentially catalyzing us to greater heights of lucidity. But being like a dream, how the coronavirus pandemic manifests within our minds as nightmare or lucidity stimulator, depends upon whether or not we recognize what it is revealing to us about ourselves and what we do with what it has triggered within us. The coronavirus can help us to remember that it is within ourselves that our true power and agency lies, another of its many gifts. Encoded in the virus is its own vaccine. It is of the utmost significance that the coronavirus is a quantum phenomenon, in that it contains within itself both death-creating poison as well as its own medicine. Encoded in the virus is its own vaccine. As interdependently connected cells in a greater living organism, each of us is being demanded by the coronavirus to realize how we can synergistically cooperate together so as to resist and overcome its invasion. Though itself continually mutating, the coronavirus is, when push comes to shove, forcing us to expand our consciousness. As such, the coronavirus is a powerful catalyst for human evolution. As Jung reminds us, a new way, which he likens to an undiscovered vein that lives within the greater body politic of humanity that connects us all, is demanding to be discovered. This unknown vein within us is a living part of the psyche that connects us with the creativity of our mutually shared collective consciousness. It connects us with each other, with our wholeness, and thereby heals our fragmentation, both within ourselves and amongst each other. This is the gift concealed within the disease that not only helps us to heal the disease, but heals us as well. This article was excerpted from the book Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World, written by Paul Levy. The article was narrated by Marie T. Russell, publisher of InnerSelf.com. We hope that you have enjoyed this article. For over 30 years, we at Inner Self have sought to encourage new attitudes and new possibilities. For more inspiration, visit us at InnerSelf.com. Thank you. Visit the Inner Self Market for new attitudes and new possibilities. You'll find inspiring books, wonderful music CDs, audiobooks, card decks, candles, jewelry, gifts, all kinds of wonderful things. Visit us at market.innerself.com.